Hello, everyone. We are now getting admissions. I think a lot of our guests are here already. Hello, everyone. As you know, we are going to talk about ESRS for Middle Eastern and African companies under the CDP webinar series. Today, we are going to talk about ESRS. We have Furkan Sadıkoğlu, which is myself. I'm here as a moderator and I will also deliver a presentation. We are very happy to be with you here today. As you know, we have significant prominent speakers with us. Let me introduce them to you first. Our first speaker, as you can see, will be CDP Berlin Senior Corporate and Policy Officer, Mr. Guillermo Casaro. And then we have Bekir Çetin, Head of Sustainability at Semtrio. I would like to welcome you for this webinar. About the process, the European Commission accepted a directive Now we have the European reporting standards. We need to publish our reports in line with this directive, and our companies will have to satisfy that requirement as well. Now, companies subject to CSRD must again satisfy requirements for reporting for ESRS. Of course, every company is very curious about what they need to do. Now, harmonization will start in 2024 for CSRD, and in 2025, they will be publishing their first reports under it. And the European companies will have a delay in the deadline until 2028. So European and non-European companies all have this on their hot topic agenda, and we know that every one of you is pretty curious about what's going to happen. As you know, with the new standards, we are looking at environmental, social, and governance issues. Now, the business world needs to be engaged in stakeholder relations and governance. Under that, ESRS has 12 standards. As we go through all of these important issues, we will be able to get a more holistic reporting structure. This is the ESRS approach. About the webinar today, as you know, it is an hour. And first of all, I would like to give the floor to Guillermo Casaro. He's going to talk about what CDP is, and he's going to give us a general perspective on the actual process. And in line with that, he's going to talk about the effects of this process on European and non-European companies. After Mr. Casaro, we are going to have a presentation from Bekir Çetin, who is going to talk about the current reporting landscape. And Semtrio company is offering guidance when it comes to ESRS requirements, and he's going to give us invaluable information how that guidance can work for companies. And after that, we are going to have a Q&A session. And please state which question you'd like to address to which of the speakers so that we can guide you to the right speaker for an answer. Before causing any further delay, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Guillermo Casaro. The floor is yours.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start sharing the presentation. Thank you so much for the introduction, Furkan. So for those of you that are not familiar with CDP, I'm just going to start with a brief introduction of our work. So CDP is it's an NGO. We work with the world's largest investors to gather data, sustainability data from the world's biggest companies. So the way that it works is we have investors signing what we call the letter to the board, which is a letter that is addressed to the board of the world's largest companies, asking these companies to submit their sustainability data to us. Similarly, there is another program at CDP that is called the CDP Supply Chain Program, where members of this program can ask their value chain for information, usually their suppliers. So these members can also, let's say, a member such as Coca-Cola or something can ask their suppliers to submit their sustainability data to CDP. And this is how it works. So CDP started doing this assessment 20 years ago. We started this voluntary, let's say, market of submitting sustainability data. And now we have a mandatory legislation, which is indeed revolutionary in terms of sustainability reporting, which is the CSRD, which is what we're going to talk about today. To give you some context, CDP data feeds into the ESG ecosystem worldwide. So our data is present in products from MSCI, one of the world's largest investment funds. It's present in Bloomberg, SAP, you name it. Our data is embedded into most products out there, which talk about ESG investing. So in order to give you some context, before we dive into the European context, I believe a lot of you that have been working with sustainability might have heard of the IFRS sustainability standards as well. And the IFRS Foundation started looking at sustainability standards from COP26, when they announced the establishment of the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. The IFRS Foundation then consolidated a series of different initiatives that were doing this type of standards development internationally. And they also work together with GRI and TCFD. So all of these initiatives have fed into what the IFRS Foundation is calling now the IFRS standards S1 and S2. S1 being the general standards and S2 being their climate standards. It is expected that they will expand into other topics and also sectorial specific standards over the next months and years, just like the ESRS does. So at CDP, we believe in the building block approach. If you report to CDP, you might have heard that we will be aligning our system, our questionnaire with the IFRS S2 standards, the climate standards, so that every company disclosing to CDP will be automatically, let's say, aligning themselves with the disclosures under IFRS S2. Also, another thing that is important to say is that the IFRS Foundation took over the responsibilities of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD. Sorry in advance for the acronym soup, but those working in this field are probably quite used to it. There's a lot of acronyms. So the IFRS Foundation took over this work from the TCFD, and the TCFD will now sort of phase out, and the work is being conducted by the IFRS. So going back to my slide here, we believe in the building block approach. So we believe the IFRS S1 and S2 standards are going to be the global baseline. in terms of sustainability standards. We see it already happening. Brazil has recently announced that it will be incorporating the IFRS standards into its legislative process. So companies and investors in Brazil will have to submit data according to the IFRS S1 and S2 standards sometime into the future. I heard from Bekir yesterday that Turkey is following a similar path, and we expect other, especially developing countries, following this path. But we also believe that the ESRS standards are the state of the art at the moment in terms of sustainability disclosures. So CDP has also announced recently a partnership with EFRAG to help the ESRS get more embedded into the real economy. So we really hope that the ESRS best practices become the norm globally, because it really means a different approach to sustainability reporting, as we're going to see next. So the CSRD, which is the topic of today's webinar, and the ESRS is a directive, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive from the European Union, which sets out the rules for sustainability reporting for non-financial and financial companies going forward within the EU. It is expected that it will be applied to 50,000 companies in the EU and many more thousand companies outside of the EU. So, as always, I like to contextualize a little bit before we dive into the specifics. The CSRD is not a case in isolation, is not a legislative proposal that comes into a vacuum. It comes into what the EU calls the EU Green Deal, which is a series of proposals to shift the European economy into a sustainable economy, into a net zero economy by 2050. And this disclosure regulations started off with the EU taxonomy, which sets out the environmental objectives of the EU. And those are the 5 objectives you see above. So climate change mitigation and adaptation, sustainable water use, biodiversity, pollution prevention, and circular economy. The EU taxonomy was then followed by a disclosure regulation for the financial sector called the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, or SFDR. The SFDR then stipulates the what is called adverse impacts. So principal adverse impact is the term where investors have to consider when disclosing to the EU what are the adverse impacts of their investments in the environment. What are the adverse impacts to the climate, to the objectives of the EU. So here you have also listed the principal adverse impacts, such as the GHG emissions of these investments, energy, water consumption, water stress activities near biodiversity sensitive areas, emissions of air pollutants, and non-recycled waste. And if you compare it to the environmental objectives of the EU, you can see that they're very similar, and this is not a coincidence. This is exactly why there is the principal adverse impacts, to make sure that the adverse impacts are not affecting the environmental objectives of the EU. And then, in order for the investors to have and be able to do this assessment of their investments, of the impact of their investments in the environment, in the environmental objectives of the EU, it was then created the CSRD, so the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And this directive is the directive that sets out the obligations of corporates to submit their data to the EU and to naturally to their investors. So I think it helps when you look it into a timeline. So the first legislation introduced was the SFDR, so the Financial Disclosure Regulation, then followed by the taxonomy. the Taxonomy Delegated Act, which incorporated the climate change objectives, then later on the environmental objectives of the EU, the so-called Taxo 4. Now, if you look at the timeline, you see that the regulation for disclosures of financial sector was significantly earlier than the CSRD. And this led to a lot of non-accuracy in the data that investors have been reporting so far. So it is expected that with the CSRD, investors are going to have way more access to good and credible data from companies. And this will be done through what is called the ESRSs, which are the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which have just been passed in the European Parliament this year, and is now an European legislation. Companies that have been reporting under the previous regulation that requested companies to report non-financial information will start disclosing in 2025, financial year data 2024. And this is then phased into several different categories, such as other large companies, which don't fit into the previous large companies criteria, then listed small and medium enterprises, and then non-EU companies will have to report in 2029 with financial year 2028. So going a bit into detail on who it applies to all large undertakings in the EU. This is whether you have a balance sheet of total of over 20 million euros or a net turnover of over 40 million euros and you have over 250 employees, or if you're a listed small or medium enterprise with a balance sheet of over 4 million euros or a net turnover of over 8 million euros or over 50 employees. And then for non-EU undertakings, if you're a listed company in the EU, you have to report under CSRD, or if you have a subsidiary that meets the criteria of what a large undertaking is, so the first set of criteria on the slide, and whether you have a branch in the EU that has more than 40 million euros in net turnover. So here in more detail, the phase-in approach from 2023 and 24, companies will already start disclosing their alignment with the EU taxonomy. And then from 25, they start reporting under CSRD, those large companies that we saw earlier, other large companies from 2026, and then so on and so forth. The slides will be shared, by the way. And then how are companies expected to report? The companies will have to have a dedicated section in their management report called sustainability statement, where they will include information on their EU taxonomy alignment, and then include all the information that is requested from them on the CSRD, and which is explained and requested on the ESRS, so the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. These information that will be submitted by companies will have to be assured. So from 2026, there will be delegated acts that establish the criteria upon which assurers can say that with a limited assurance that statement, that sustainability statement, has been checked and has a limited assurance. From 2028, it is expected that the criteria for reasonable assurance, which is a more detailed type of assurance, will also be set forth by delegated acts from the European Commission. So now we move into the ESRS. So the ESRS, so the CSRD is the legislation that stipulates that companies need to report sustainability information, and the ESRS is basically how companies are going to report this information. So it applies, we have a set of different standards. overarching standards, as we're going to see, as well as specific topical standards. So here we can see that the standards follow the ESG nomenclature. So we have the cross-cutting standards, ESRS 1, which sets out general requirements. So how do you provide this information? What is the type of template that you should use? How do you structure your reporting? Whereas the ESRS 2 gives out the general disclosure data points that companies need to take into account when making their sustainability statements, and then the topical standards. Every topical standards is actually dependent on a company's materiality assessment. So all of them are actually optional. So if a company does not consider itself material to one of these specific topics, so you don't consider to have a material impact in one of them, you may omit disclosing in this topic. For all of them, you don't necessarily need to provide too much explanation apart from climate change. So if you do not consider yourself to have an impact, a material impact on climate change, which nowadays is probably very rare, if you do not consider, then you need to provide a substantial explanation as to why you don't consider your company to have a substantial impact on climate change. So as we see, we have environmental, social, and governance standards, so the ESG. We have climate change, pollution, water, biodiversity, and resource use for the environmental part. Then workforce, or your own workforce in your value chain, affected communities and consumers and end users under the social pillar, and under the governance pillar, your business conduct. All these standards will be complemented by a set of sector-specific standards by 2026. So a few sectors have been selected and will have specific sector standards for them to be applied from 2026. These are naturally some of the most impactful sectors in the environmental and social side. So just to, I know Bekir is going to talk about this, but just to give you some context on materiality, the ESRS introduces what is called the double materiality approach. So the IFRS Foundation, for example, the standards that we saw earlier in the beginning of the presentation, they follow what is called the financial materiality. So a financial materiality means companies looking inward at the impact that the environment has on their own operations. Whereas the impact materiality, which is, for example, the type of materiality that is embedded into the GRI standards, looks outward. So is the impact that the company has in the environment, or on the environment, sorry. And then the combination of these two is what the EU named the double materiality approach. So when you're reporting to the ESRSs, you need to consider both the impacts that the environment has on your company and the impacts that your company has on the environment. So the general application is that companies should disclose all the information that they gathered within their materiality assessment. So this needs to be the first step that companies will be taking, conducting a credible materiality assessment. And for this, the European Union, through EFRAG, the organ that it has been designated to conduct this type of work in the EU's name, is developing what is called the materiality assessment guidance. And this guidance will help companies to conduct these materiality assessments in a credible way. It is expected that these guidance materials will be released by the end of this year, or latest beginning of next year. They are available on the EFRAG website already under a draft form. So I would encourage those of you that are interested to go into the EFRAG website and download the draft form to start assessing what do you need to do to comply. So then moving on into value chain, and I think this is really important for companies operating in the Middle East and Africa that do business with European companies, but don't have a subsidiary or a branch in the EU. So it's important that you understand that you also will be affected. So companies within value chains of European companies will also be affected by CSRD. Well, how? Because basically companies that are operating in the EU have to gather information on all those topical standards as well as on the general standards that that are applicable to their value chain. So they will have to gather information regarding their value chain impact on climate change, their value chain impact on biodiversity, so on and so forth. However, there's a caveat, which is that companies are only required to provide specific information from the third year of reporting. That means there is a 3-year period where companies can report data on their value chain according to their best efforts or to the available information that they have within their own company. So there is, let's say, a 3-year period for you as a supplier or as a distributor, for you that are embedded within European value chains to prepare for giving this type of information to your European customers. So the CSRD tells companies that they have to set measurable, outcome-oriented, and time-bound targets. And these targets are related to climate change, to biodiversity, social standards, and all the other standards we've seen. In order to comply with these targets, the European companies will have to engage with their value chain. This means that they will have to have new, more stringent procurement policies in place. These include, for example, Scope 3 targets. So all the targets that are embedded within a company's value chain. Why does it matter to you? Because you're basically going to be required by your European customers to provide this information to them under the risk of being excluded from their value chains if you do not provide this information. Because these new, more stringent policies in place will then force their suppliers, their distributors, and so on, to be within a certain limit, so to operate within a certain limit of GHG emissions, to have due diligence systems in place to guarantee that there is no forced labor in their value chains. So this means really that is a completely change in the way that you do business with the European companies going forward. So this is the main message that I had for you today. I'm happy to take any questions later on and to give back the floor to Furkan. Thank you so much. Just one last thing that I just wanted to thank our sponsors from the European Commission, which have been actually sponsoring this capacity building work that we do under a grant that we received from the Commission. So with that, back to you, Furkan.
Thank you, Guilherme, for all the valuable information you have provided to us. It's been enlightening. Now, thank you very much on behalf of the audience for this presentation. Now, Semtrio Sustainability Head, Mr. Bekir Çetin, is going to deliver his presentation. He is going to talk to us about the Middle East and Africa region with specific focus on reporting requirements and CSRD requirements. The floor is yours. Hello, everyone. Once again, Furkan, thank you very much. He offered us great information, and it's very nice to be hearing about all of this from CDP, from the mouth of CDP, from Gio. And yes, ESRS standards, European Union Sustainability Reporting Standards, have developed significantly, and CDP has a big role in it. So it was very nice to hear about all of that. Now I'm going to talk about our own region, Middle East and Africa, MENA region. I will first start with the current situation, the current reporting standards that are in place. And I will give you a timeline of what has happened in this area and then what we need to do going forward. We are going to talk about some technical aspects, how to shape it, how to do it, how to basically project for it. First of all, in our region, in MENA, Turkey, Middle East, and African countries, there is the current situation relating to the reporting standards. In my presentation, you can see two parts. The first one is the barriers on reporting so far. In this region, companies have faced certain challenges when it came to requirements, reporting requirements. This is the set of challenges for the HR, for corporate management. In 2023, we had new reporting standards, and after that, we have drivers on reporting from now on. So companies will be expecting a new landscape. First of all, when we look at the region, considering corporate sustainability reporting, we had a lack of mandatory reporting standards. This was the most striking barrier. And currently, the companies in this region, and especially Turkey, did not have any mandatory reporting standards. This was a specific barrier to corporate sustainability reporting for companies in this region. And of course, we had GRI, SASB, TCFD, that are global voluntary reporting networks, frameworks. They were already present, but they had a very limited impact on the companies themselves because they were voluntary. Another barrier was resource constraints, lack of financial resources, human resources, and expertise. The companies of the region did not have the expertise to conduct sustainability reporting, and they didn't have the human resources, and they weren't able to set aside financial resources for this process. These were significant barriers. Considering sustainability reporting, a company needs to have reporting frameworks to follow in order to report on their sustainability, and they need to prioritize their operations in the short term, medium term, and long term. But considering the regional companies, we see that the companies focus only on the short term for their sustainability requirements and sustainability reporting, and they didn't go long term. And of course, we had difficulties of data collection and lack of data knowledge. It wasn't very systematic, the collection of data. So for that reason, we needed a very good framework which would be clear to all companies, and companies needed to have expert human resources to manage this process. Sustainability covers all functions, but it has to be owned and it has to be embraced by the management first and foremost. We see ESG nowadays, environmental, social, and governance. So reporting must also cover these areas now. And unfortunately, there was a low level of awareness of ESG at the management boards. In terms of sustainability reporting, we need volunteering networks And also in 2023, we have the mandatory reporting requirements. So considering all of that, companies need to establish risks, identify them, and incorporate this and risk assessment in their growth strategies so that they can offer a well-rounded report. But companies had some challenges with that. At the same time, in the region that we live in, there was no requirement for sustainability reporting, and for that reason, customers and investors have misleading pressure put on companies, and companies also sometimes opted for greenwashing, so reporting inaccurate data just so that they can look green. And this was an expectation there that reporting will not be done unless it's mandatory. And of course, we needed stakeholder engagement, and companies experienced certain challenges on this matter, and this prevented companies in this region from offering well-rounded reports. So from 2023 onwards, what should we expect? What are the drivers that will guide and encourage and perhaps compel companies to report on sustainability? First of all, we have the potential international funds and investments. And these funders and investors will require reporting standards for sustainability. It is already their expectation from companies so that they can give them access to capital. Again, investors have significant expectations, stakeholders as well. There are customer requests and requests from the supply chain. These will compel companies to go for sustainability reporting. And another part is peer analysis, because you have competitors. So companies look to their next competitor and see them reporting on sustainability. So this will create a domino effect of encouragement. But the biggest encouragement came from the emerging international reporting regulations. And the most important one was mentioned by Guy just now, European Corporate Sustainability Reporting Standards, ESRS. Now, by 2028 and 29, Mena companies will be affected by this regulation also. I don't think that it may be even earlier because of the value chain engagement with Europe. Now, this was put in place in 2023, and with that respect, sustainability reporting was made subject. Now, this was published as a draft by the European Union, and in parallel, as Guy mentioned, we had IFRS Foundation, and under it, ISSB was established, the board, and that board went to the London exchange market and published two sets of standards. Now I would like to the ISSB S1 and S2. Now I have some news from Turkey, the Public Accounting Standards Authority. We have the Public Oversight Agency in Turkey, and this organization, the Ombudsman, this is the Public Oversight Authority, accepted and published the draft versions of S1 and S2. And it also announced that these standards will be incorporated into the national legislation soon. Now, from today onwards, national and international lawmakers are already put forward mandatory standards for the regional companies, especially in the EU and also outside the EU in the value chain, and then to the companies themselves. The ESRS standards, European Union Sustainability Standards, actually come from GRI standards. In GRI standards, we had the widest scope of voluntary standards, voluntary sustainability standards. This was the biggest set of these standards in the world. I think it was established in 1998, and it covered regional companies, and which actually provided sustainability reporting under the GRI standards on a voluntary basis. After ESRS, EFRAG started a text for harmonization and integration with GRI. And they said that GRI will offer a base for companies to report under ESRS. And GRI and ESRS standards can talk to each other. In some parts, they are harmonized, but in some other parts, they're able to talk partially. They are harmonized partially. So this was also announced that there will be a bridge between the two. For that reason, considering the regional companies, most of them already comply with GRI standards in their sustainability reporting, and companies who are doing this well will have it easier when it comes to the ESRS reporting. So they will already have a background, a basis for their future reporting. And we have the IFRS Foundation, which I mentioned before. GRI is on a voluntary basis, but IFRS actually published a specific document partnering with GRI standards. And S1 and S2 sustainability standards of IFRS will be used to publish specific maps for harmonization with ESRS, and there will be an interaction and harmonization between ESRS and S1 and S2. They already have some common points. So ESRS and IFRS will be able to talk to each other. This is the harmonized structure that is being established. Now, GRI standards are the most common reporting standards in Turkey, in Middle East and Africa. So until now, companies who have already reported on sustainability under GRI will have an easier time in reporting under ESRS. They will have already worked the muscles necessary for ESRS reporting. For that reason, we can offer the explanation as such. With the regulations, we are going to be moving forward to an even more clear way of reporting. Also, I would like to mention about the harmonization of companies with ESRS. Guy provided a more detailed timeline to us, but I wanted to show you again the companies in this region included in the value chain of European companies will have to offer data when requested by their clients in Europe, their customers in Europe. This is one of the risks for the regional companies. So before 2028, regional companies must actually start considering ESRD standards already. They must know about them. They must be ready to implement it immediately. They must actually already start voluntary reporting under GRI standards, because this will allow them to strengthen their capacity. Now, starting from 2029, any companies with a branch or subsidiary in European Union will be expected to report under ESRS also. The company may not be located in Europe, but in Turkey or Middle East or Africa. But if you have a subsidiary or a branch in the European Union, and if you satisfy certain criteria, a net turnover of a certain amount of money for 2 years, then you will have to start reporting under ESRS. Of course, we need to have a very good read of this timeline and also the requirements. I believe it's crucial for regional companies to have a good understanding of this timeline. So when we report under ESRS, what information should be disclosed? Now, ESRS 2 General Statement Standard. I'm going to show you the structure now. This covers corporate sustainability policy, roles and responsibilities of the governance body. This is mostly the board of directors, how these roles and responsibilities are managed and how they are assigned. This is governance information. Then comes sustainability due diligence, sustainability risk management, resilience to risks, corporate market position, strategy and business model, the interests and views of stakeholders, their expectations, material impacts, risks and opportunities, actions and the resources used in actions, metrics in relation to material sustainability matters, sustainability strategy implementation, how they will integrate sustainability into their business practices. This is the expectation under ESRS. As Gui mentioned, it's very important for companies to align with ESRS. I'm going to go into further details. When we consider regional companies, they have always reported under GRI standards on a voluntary basis. And for that reason, they had impact materiality. This meant that companies focused on their impact on external factors. But ESRS is going to bring forward double materiality. It's not only impact materiality, but also financial materiality at the same time. So both of these materialities have been incorporated into double materiality, and they have to be considered by companies. Companies must work on their impact materiality, and they must also do financial prioritization and financial materiality. And these two materiality sets must be combined. And significant sustainability matters under these two parts should be brought together and reported on, again, under ESRS headings. And this double materiality must be well understood by companies, and they should start working on it now. Now, I did have this in my presentation, but these will be shared with you after the webinar. Now we have impact materiality, the impact of the company on the climate. Financial materiality, however, covers the impact of climate events on the company in financial terms. So when we bring them together, we come to double materiality. Now, detailed definitions can be found on EFRAG website, and you can download ESRS standards to see the definitions. Now, ESRS draft standards were published in April, and in recent months, we had data points created by the European Union within the ESRS standards, these data points are provided to companies because they must offer data under those data points. Now here you can see the 4 divisions made by EFRAG. The first one is cross-cutting standards. They cover all standards. They talk about general reporting, the templates, general requirements in ESRS 1, and then we have general disclosures in ESRS 1 again. These are the cross-cutting standards. This is followed by 3 main groups of standards. The first one is environmental standards. Under it, we have 5 ESRS, E1, E2, E3, E4, and E5. And ESRS tells companies how to report on the data under these standards. And these are 5 data points specifically. On the social side, we have 4 requirements, S1, S2, S3, and S4. These give guidance about how social matters should be reported on and which data points should be shared. When you download these data points in Excel, you will see verbal data and numeral data. So it's a social kind of soft data and hard data. And then we have governance standards under G1. We have 52 data points in covering business conduct. This is my final slide. This is quite a simple slide. How to project, how to ensure that regional companies can harmonize themselves with ESRS. First of all, we need due diligence. Well, this is like a gap analysis. The company should establish its baseline in line with the ESRS expectations, and the company should consider how it's going to harmonize itself with ESRS standards. Then comes the strategy, business model. The company needs to check the current strategy and business model, and they need to also check their risk assessment mechanism. Do they have a risk assessment committee? Do they have an early detection committee? How does the company manage its risks? So under ESRS, companies should look at these elements. And then comes double materiality. Companies should work on this. This will bring a lot of benefits to them because this is an important concept. Because the company will look at the results of double materiality in structuring its disclosures. And in line with the results, they will go to the relevant parts of ESRS to see how they will issue the disclosures and which data points they should offer data on. And as well as, the indicators they need to check, the actual steps they are going to take in physical form. And then we have data collection before the actual tracking, how the process goes on. Thank you very much for your attention. We may have a very brief question and answer session. Furkan, over to you. Bekir, thank you very much for this valuable information on ESRS. Now, we are moving on to the questions and answers. Now, I'm checking the questions. The first one is for you, Bekir. Regarding GRI reporting, it is the general and most used reporting standards. In Turkey and Middle East, reporting under GRI may prepare companies for ESRS reporting. Can we actually consider GRI reporting as a stepping stone towards ESRS? Absolutely. As I mentioned in my presentation, GRI is the most commonly used voluntary reporting framework for the regional companies. GRI also has a partnership with ESRS. They have this announced alignment, and considering that, reporting under GRI, checking GRI standards, in a way will be like a preparation for the coming requirements. I absolutely believe that it is so. I believe EFRAG and GRI will publish more detailed mapping, more detailed documents and alignment papers on this, and they already provide their own official statements on this. Thank you. Thank you. Another question is to Guilherme. This is from Turkey. For a long time, companies have been answering to CDP, reporting to CDP, and this year CDP announced that IFRS S2 will be aligned, or there will be an alignment with S2. And in this region, companies subject to ESRS may require support. And can we say CDP will offer that support to companies in this region?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the idea behind the partnership that we have signed with EFRAG, is to both do capacity building work with companies within the European Union, but also outside of the European Union, and to also provide a platform where our people working in the questionnaire and the people working in the standards within the ESRS side can agree on areas that CDP can leverage within the questionnaire to incorporate the, let's say, best practices introduced by ESRS. So to develop new questions within our questionnaire that gather data points that are relevant under ESRS and therefore help prepare companies that disclose to CDP to disclose to the ESRS standards.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this answer. Now checking the time, we don't have much time. It's actually ending. We were able to answer 2 questions from the audience. First of all, Guilherme, thank you very much for this presentation, and Bekir also. Thank you very much for your presentations, and thank you, the audience, for your continued interest and patience. Now, of course, we will be in contact for future webinars. And thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Guy, for your contribution and support. Have a good day, everyone. Good day, everyone.